I think I dropped my MCA student table, yes or no, which we created in the first level. My MCA student table, yes or no, which we created in the first level. In order to work with your ref functions, okay, in order to practically work with your ref functions, we need to have one object table, because only object tables will be having object IDs. Because every record what you insert as far as your in order to work with your ref functions, record will become an in order to record internally, practically work with your ref functions, only object records will be having the object IDs, because only object tables will be having object IDs. We cannot see the object IDs directly, because every record what you be very clear about that. As far they are not like OIDs where ref function just call the pseudo column and it will start displaying. Practically work with your ref functions, only object records. So whenever you think that you want to make your object IDs to be displayed, Oracle provides you one special kind of function. Be very clear about that's nothing but called as ref function. Now this ref function has some kind of fundamental select requirements. We'll look into that. But before that, let me create the object table. Object so that we can just start discussing Oracle about the process. Now before that, what I'll do is I'll remove anything what I had in the previous. Now this ref function has some kind of fundamental select requirements. We'll look into that. Before that, let me create the object table. Object so that we can just start discussing about the process. Now before that, what I'll do my table, I'll remove anything what I had in the previous. That MBA function has some kind of fundamental select requirements. I just want to remove it permanently. Before that, let me create the object. Then I'm just dropping my view. So that we can just start discussing Oracle provides. That's the view name. I'll remove anything what I had in the previous. And then we are dropping another view. I just want what we have, okay? So it's not compulsory, but I'm just dropping my view. Whatever we are trying to do, we want to catch up with what is exactly happening. Therefore, we are doing this. Are you getting me? So now I'm saying select, and then we are dropping another view tab. We don't have any kind of objects registered into this particular metadata. So it's not compulsory, but I'm just dropping now whatever we are trying to do, we just want to create the what is exactly MCA table what we created in the first level. So now I'm saying select, and then we are dropping just that particular table and the view what we created in the first level. We just want to have it. So it's not compulsory. I'm not fundamentally trying to keep it very complicated. We just want to create aspect what is exactly MCA. We are just trying to take that simple student data type what we had, just that particular table and the view. Okay, are you getting me? Is my voice is clear now? So technically, whenever we are working, I'm just taking that particular table that's fundamentally done already on the student data type, okay, the simple student data type. So you can just watch. We created the student data type in the previous sessions, which was having just a primitive collection. And this table called as MCA student, which is an object table, is also inheriting that particular structure as it is, okay? Now, whether it's a nested object table or the object relational table, then I think technically you are very specifically clear about those things with the discussions what we had in the previous class. Now, let us just not get ourselves into the confusion. Now, into this particular table, I just want to insert few records now, okay? Now, individually, I just don't want to go for it. Therefore, I'm calling a routine that's just kept with few insert statements between begin and end. You don't worry about the begin and end, okay? That's a PLS skill block I created. And these are the records what I'm inserting now, okay? I'm just trying to keep somewhere around 5 student records into my object table called as MCA student. Got it? I'm even committing that particular data. So now I can say that within my MCA student object table, I'm very clear in my words. Within my MCA student object table, currently we are having 5 object records. Now, whether you accept or you do not accept, definitely these are object records that are registered within our system, okay? These 5 records are object records registered into the object table. Okay. Hence, each object record will have one object ID which is unique throughout the database. Allocated by the Oracle's environment. Okay. Am I clear with you? Now the issue is we want to see these object IDs now. You cannot see the object IDs directly at any point of time. Like your row IDs. If you want to see the row IDs, you just watch. I'm saying select MCA dot. I'll just say row ID. So I'll directly go for row ID, comma MCA dot star. And I'm saying from MCA student. Okay. So this is a very clear proof that every record, either it is relational record or object record or object relational record, once it is stored into your Oracle database, it technically contains definitely a row ID. Because row ID will always try to show you the physical location where exactly this record has been stored within your Oracle database. Without a row ID, none of the rows in your particular Oracle database as records can be stored. But these are not just the records. These are records in an object table. Now, for every record in object table, it has one object ID. Now, we cannot see the object IDs directly as we can see the row IDs. So that's the area where you need the ref function. Okay, that's the area where you need the ref function. So if you want to understand ref function, you should first understand what are object types, and then you should understand what is exactly an object table, and then you can always understand the criteria of the ref function, what exactly it does. Okay, so the ref function allows to reference the existing rows that are stored within your object tables in Oracle database. So whenever you execute your ref function, this ref function has the ability to get you that individual object ID that has been assigned for every object record that has been stored into your particular Oracle object tables. Am I clear with you? I'm very specific in my words. There are certain requirements what your ref function expects. First thing is, ref function can always operate only for object tables and can only return the object IDs of object records. So you should always catch one particular point. Whenever you're calling the ref function always expects, be very clear, the alias of the object table that is fundamentally declared in your from clause. Am I clear with you? I'm repeating once again. When you call your ref function, you should definitely pass an argument of the alias of the object table that is declared within the from clause of that select statement. Now your where clauses and all these things are optionals now. Are you catching the point? So just to make up ourselves very clear, ref function always expects an argument which is the name of the alias of the object table declared in the from clause of the query. Okay, that's what you need to fundamentally understand. Don't forget that. Okay, now then your ref always returns you the object IDs. So it returns object IDs of only the records stored in the object tables. And one very important point you should remember, whenever you declare your ref function, your ref function always will return different object IDs under different systems, and these object IDs could be wrapped onto multiple number of lines. Okay, the size of the object ID and the exact value of the object ID what your ref function depends on the state of the system under which you are executing the query. Therefore, you cannot say that these object IDs are absolutely constants and they are available as it is to your particular Oracle database. Okay, it depends on the system with which you are configuring and you're operating. Am I clear with you? So whenever you start working with your construct of your ref function and you're just executing to see the object ID, you should always remember one thing: your ref function can only reference to row objects. You cannot use your ref function on column objects. What are column objects? Just go back by 24 hours. Yesterday we created one object relational table. Do you remember? Now in that object relational table, we had one column called as student collection column. Such columns are called as what? Column objects. So on such a kind of columns, you cannot see the object IDs. Am I clear with you? Where your column objects are generally your abstract data types. They can be large objects or they can be collections. The ref function by itself, whenever you're executing, it does not returns any useful information. Because of this, majority of the time, people have a wrong notion that the object IDs that are returned by Oracle, they are not meaningful by themselves. Therefore, we cannot have any meaningful implementation to the real time. These are some wrong notions that are existing among majority of the development communities. See, no object is intelligent by itself. Therefore, no object ID can have intelligence of what it can do. If you want to utilize your object ID for a purpose of its implementation to your requirement in the application or project, you should know the domain of how to use the object IDs. That is where we are about to switch to the next levels. Therefore, I can just say like this is our preparation to make ourselves get into a real-time thought process and implementation at the next levels. Am I clear with you? So just I need a great amount of concentration from your side. So just watch carefully the remaining things what we are trying to do. Okay, I'm just calling my edit plus so that we can have a reference now. Okay, so this is a query what we have written here. Which is fundamentally returning the criteria and composition of the row ID with the corresponding record. Do you agree with me? Now our goal is to get the object ID. So you just watch the same query. I'm making it as a change by saying call the ref function. Okay, to the ref function, we have to give the corresponding object tables alias. and I'm just trying to say OID. Okay. Now, initially, let us see exactly how the object ID is getting generated. And we don't want to get the object, we can get the object ID for all the fundamental records that are fundamentally existing within my MCA student table. We know that every record has its own object ID. So did you understand this declaration? Come on, hello. Now, once this is fundamentally done, I'm taking this particular query and I'm just trying to execute it here. So this is your object ID returned for that record. So you can just watch here, your object ID is fundamentally having certain kinds of alphanumerical sequence. Now, if you look into this object ID by itself is not looking anywhere meaningful for our understanding. Am I correct? That's why the documentation says object IDs do not return any meaningful information by themselves. Are you understanding that statement? Now, just to make a convenience on the process, what I'll do is I'll just add something like column OID format, something like this. Okay, I'm just taking that format so as you can just understand. Now, once again, if I'm executing it, you can just have clarity that every record in any table, in any kind of table, definitely has a row ID, which is a physical address to the location where the record is existing. And object ID is nothing but which is available only for the object records, and we can see that only through the corresponding ref function. Am I clear? So just to make ourselves fundamentally convenient, I'm just pushing up one way clause into this. Where I think the column name is S name. Okay. That's student's name. So we just want to see the object ID for only Mr. Seshu. So we're just making a fundamental filter and we are just looking at the object ID of only that corresponding Seshu. So now you may have your own doubt. So technically, what is so great about this object ID and what's the criteria of advantage I can have with it? Okay, see, utilizing your object is your own choice of analysis. So you need to just understand these particular factors very clearly. So to understand how we can utilize this object ID, let us go to the next level. Now this object ID is given by Oracle's architecture. Do you agree with me? So there should be definitely some idea behind this object ID creation by Oracle's architecture. So until we do not understand what is the basic functionality for which these object IDs have been designed, we cannot utilize them. Second thing, the pattern with which the object ID is getting generated, I think it's Oracle which is controlling that. Do you agree with me? So then that particular object ID should have some information definitely what we may not be able to understand with our fundamental eyes. So one very interesting factor you should always understand is behind this object ID, Oracle is definitely encrypting the object table's name and its location, the area where its stuff of that information is stored, and the corresponding object data type on which this object table has been created. All this information is there behind that particular object ID. Therefore, if we are applying the ref function, if the information that is existing behind the object records is getting represented as an object ID, then when we execute a deref function, okay, dereference function, then technically I should get back my original data once again. So for that purpose, Oracle is providing you one special kind of function called as deref. Now, before I'm getting into my deref, are you clear with the ref function? So let us just try to understand deref now. You should always understand one thing. Deref is a very special kind of function in Oracle, which always takes a reference value, as an argument. When we say reference value, you should always understand in Oracle, it is the object ID that is generated through ref function. Am I clear? Whenever we are saying reference value, you should always remember we are talking about the concept of the object ID that is generated by the ref function. So that object ID which is generated by the ref function, if you can take that object ID and give as an argument to this deref function, this deref function will returns the original data that is existing behind that object ID in a object form. I'm stressing the point. It returns the data in the object form through a constructor. Am I clear with you? So just watch. For this process to happen, I'm constructing some other kind of table and some other kind of architecture. And before I take you to that level of the architecture, I just wanted to check few things now. Okay. So this query you just watched, I'm once again refining this now. Now this is returning the corresponding object ID. Now I'm calling my deref function. Okay, just watch there. I'm calling my deref function. And this deref function always expects, okay, always expects an argument of reference value. Okay, an argument of reference value. When we say an argument of reference value, you should always keep one thing in your mind. Any object ID which is generated from the object table using the ref function. Okay, any object ID which is generated from the object table using the ref function. Am I clear with you? So just watch. This ref of MCA is returning what? Object ID. So I'm just copying this and I'm just pasting it as a nested functional call into the deref. Okay. So you should always check one thing. This ref function generates object ID of the object records in the object table as arguments. I'll make it more clear, as an argument, okay, to the outer function deref. Okay, that's what is fundamentally happening. Means you're returning the object IDs are catching that. Am I clear with you? That functionality should come into your mind definitely, man. If your functionality is not coming into your mind, you can't do anything. So now this object IDs are taken by the deref, and what deref actually does now? Deref returns, okay, it returns actual object record of the reference object ID by encapsulating every object record in the default constructor of the object type. Am I clear? So when you look into the output, you'll start understanding. Just watch carefully. Just for our convenience, I'll say this is our object record. Okay, just an alias to make ourselves convenient. So you actually supplied this. You actually supplied that. Are you getting me? So when you supplied that to your deref function, your deref function returned the object record to you, which is totally encapsulated. The record is totally encapsulated within the constructor. Are you watching that? So what is actually happening behind the architecture, you have to definitely understand, and you have to definitely catch up. Am I clear with you? So I don't think by following those by following through those particular lines, whatever we have, the issue is very clear. Any confusions on the other side? Are you comfortable? Now, if this particular criteria is not understood, then definitely I can say it will take some good amount of time for you to catch the next level, where we establish one very wonderful architecture, which is actually part of your real-time constructs. So just to make the things simpler by nature, I'm only calling this, and I'm eliminating my Seshu. So those are all my object records returned to the fundamental constructor. Okay, return to the fundamental constructor, where I have already said in my previous classes, we definitely have a constructor for every object type what we create. Now, taking this into the concept, we are trying to establish one architecture to understand what is the best we can do with the corresponding object ID concepts. Now, there are two kinds of application projects now. One is your relational projects, what you have already been understanding for so many number of days. The second is technically the object relational architecture and object oriented architecture, what we are currently concentrating. Now, we have one more level of architecture that is called as object reference architecture. Object reference architecture is nothing but a kind of environment where you have object tables or your relational tables which carry directly columns that will store the references. Columns that will store the references directly. So you just go back and recollect, we were missing only one constraint, that is a ref constraint. All the constraints we have discussed very specifically in one area. I think on that day I told you ref constraints are the only things we are postponing, and we'll look into them at the later stages. Now I can definitely say we are just working out with a concept of the ref constraints, where be very careful to understand certain things. When now this is looking like a normal table what we are creating, yes or no? But this is a very interesting table where you watch this column called as in charge name. This column called as in charge name is having which data type, man? Can you just tell me? It's containing your primitive relational data type. Okay, it's containing primitive relational data type. So this is very clear that this column will store the data which is relational by nature. Okay, which is relational by nature. So we don't have any confusion on that column. But when you come to this column, you watch, this is a very special kind of column. This column will store the object IDs of the object records created on the reference of student type. But we said just now, object IDs can be generated only through the select statement by calling the ref function. And one very important point you should remember about ref function is ref function can be used only with select statements. That's first point. Second point, ref function can be part of only the projection of the select statements. Can be part of the projection of the select statements. But when I want to catch any data into my table, okay, whenever I want to capture any data into my table, I need insert statement. Do you agree with me? Now, insert statement is not a problem for us. But the issue is the first column in this student in charges table is a varchar2 of primitive. So I can handle that in insert. But the second column in my student in charges table is a column that is a reference to the student data type, which is expecting only the data in the form of object IDs. So when you keep this data into this particular column, you cannot execute the normal insert because we need a value which is an object ID. But here the controversy is object IDs can be generated only when select statements are used. And any data in the table can be stored only through an insert statement. So the student in charge column is actually referencing to the data that is stored somewhere else under the control of the reference of the object type architecture. So the ref function should point towards the student in charge column where it can transport those object IDs for storage. So handling these kind of tables technically makes a big experience for us. And the beauty here is the student in charges table is a relational reference table. It's having the relational column and reference column. So it's trying to manage both the kind of data, partially object by nature, partially relational by nature, but very different from what we had yesterday with MBA students. In MBA students, we directly declared a data type without using this ref. Yesterday, we never had this ref in MBA student. If you don't declare this ref, it becomes a object column. If you don't have this ref, it is an object column. Object columns can be managed using normal inserts with the constructor. Okay, that's what we have seen in the last 24 hours. Are you people are recollecting? But today this table is not like that. This table is technically saying that it is going to keep the references of the student. Now I want one answer from you. Data type actually contains the data or its instance actually contains the data? What is your opinion? Instances. Now here this table is referencing to the instance or it is referencing to the type? Can you tell me? It is referencing to the type or it's referencing to the instance? Watch carefully. It is referencing to the type, not the instance. So how wonderfully Oracle is technically trying to secure your data, you just understand. So yesterday what we discussed with today what we have discussed on ref function and the fundamentals of dref, if you are very clear, then in next 24 hours I am going to build one very wonderful architecture which really gives us some great idea of how Oracle is planning all these kind of concepts in object oriented functionalities. So it's now your turn to come along with me and concentrate and participate in workman. Okay. So let us see what's exactly waiting for us in next 24 hours. Thank you very much. Once again with you tomorrow. Have a nice day. But before we are leaving, we are starting one new Python batch from tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, man. We'll be sending you the meeting link. So please see that you are sharing it with your friends. If you have been really feeling that the training process executed by me is looking convenient with you. So for any of your friends who are in requirement, you can share that link. For the next 10 days, that link will be the same. The meeting link will be the same. And you can just join the meeting directly with registration process. Just give your name and your mail IDs and you can just register and you can come in with the Zoom. And the same class for the next demo sessions. So all the demo sessions will be available live in YouTube. Okay. In my channel, you can directly join into the live criteria. Okay. If you are not having convenience to connect with the link, then you can directly connect to the YouTube channel and you can start looking into the demo sessions from there. And I'm also posting the advertisement into the Facebook. My kind request is please share the post. Okay. Like, definitely you'll do it, but please share. One share can make a big lot of difference in reaching to the people. Okay. So every student comes and likes it, but my request is please share it. Thank you, gentlemen. Once again with you tomorrow. Have a nice day. Take care of yourself.